let's finish our show today with our weekly chat with Michael Redmond from the Artesia Historical Museum and Art Center. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
We rolling through the day today. In the last couple of weeks, you've been talking about agriculture and the founding, the original folks that set up business here in Eddy County, and we learned a lot about Mr. Eddy and Mr. Hagerman and some of the other folks that are even remembered by name through names of towns or counties, and kind of bring us take us where we want to go today.
Well, today we are looking back at Lake Avalon, Lake McMillan, and how they were built, and the railroad originally running from Pecos to the town of Eddy.
Mm-hmm.
So back then, Eddy and Hagerman, they were investing a lot of money into building up irrigation systems in order to take water from the Pecos River and divert it to farms. All those little homesteads, well, large homesteads that they got, they divided them up into 40-acre lots and sold them for $25 an acre.
Mm-hmm.
In order for that to work, they had to have an irrigation system. And that is where they ran into a lot of trouble. I mentioned at the closing of last week, Lake Avalon flooded a few times, and every time it flooded, the dam was washed out, and everything had to be redone from scratch.
Right.
And the reason for that is because, well, Charles Eddy and James Hagerman, they were businessmen from the era. They would probably be considered Gilded Age robber barons by today's standards. One of the things they did was they tried to keep their costs as low as possible, which makes sense from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But part of that included using local materials, local supplies to build everything, which, among other things, meant they didn't work with concrete in building anything.
Okay.
Which was a bit problematic. Another problem was that as a cost-saving measure, Charles Eddy, he brought in a lot of guest workers from Mexico because they could be paid less than $1 a day, unlike the people in Seven Rivers who offered to do the work for more than $1 a day.
Sure.
So, as a cost-saving measure, he hired employees from outside the country. He apparently didn't hire the best engineers to design the entire system, and his employees were very demotivated. They were unmotivated. The pay was better than they could get in Mexico, but the problem is that once they arrived here to work, they were not allowed to live in the town of Eddy. They had to live on property owned by the company, which, of course, was deducted from their paychecks.
Ah, they had to pay rent.
And on top of that, they were very discouraged from going into the town of Eddy itself by the residents and by their employers.
Mm-hmm.
And so their options for finding food and for finding entertainment, just south of Carlsbad was a town named Phoenix, and a little to the northwest was a town called Lone Wolf. And those were towns that formed in response to Charles Eddy banning alcohol from the town of Eddy. Of course, the town fathers had that worked into the town ordinances, no alcohol, but that was also in the covenants and restrictions on all deeds from the town of Eddy.
Sure. You bought property. It was right there in the covenant. It says you can't build a bar, can't sell alcohol at this location.
And so towns like Phoenix and Lone Wolf started because those were out in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, all those laborers of Mexican descent, when they went into towns like Phoenix, They could shop at some of the stores, but a lot of the stores actually even banned them from entering their stores. So that it's a little odd to take into consideration that in a county that is heavily Protestant, there were a lot of people of Mexican descent who were Catholic who wanted to shop and buy alcohol, and they were not allowed in the shops.
Right. Right.
But the people from people from the town of Eddy could go over there and drink and gamble and visit the gambling dens and brothels and other unsavory businesses without any issue. And in fact, there was one instance where a large number of workers from I believe they might have been railroad workers, because there's heavy overlap between the two projects. They were all guest workers from Mexico. They came into Phoenix, and as they walked into town, they noticed that quite a few of the buildings were on fire because everything was made out of wood, and they used gas for lighting, and so the inevitable always happens.
Right.
And they just stood there and watched as the businesses that banned them from entering just slowly burned to the ground, which upset the business owners, but seems like a little bit of karma. So the workers were. Are
there any remnants of these towns that still exist, or are they pretty well absorbed by just the growth of Carlsbad now?
Well, they were actually Phoenix was actually forced to leave. Mm-hmm. All the owners of the bars and saloons and gambling dens and businesses like that, they were actually forced to dismantle their businesses and leave Eddy County.
Okay.
Not through any legal means, but simply the people in the town of Eddy showing up with pitchforks and torches and guns one day and telling them to leave.
Right, right.
But those areas are now incorporated into town of Carlsbad.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the workers were very unhappy, and unhappy workers are not very effective workers. So that did not help the situation with Lake Avalon at all. Mm-hmm. But something else, and here's where Artesia finally figures into everything. James Hagerman really undermined himself because he was so interested in irrigation through lakes and rivers and canals that he thought that wells for water were just a short-term fad, that everybody would want his water.
Right.
And that's how the entire business was built, that people would pay into the Pecos Valley companies to get water.
Right.
And it really undermined him because, as it turned out, when people started drilling wells, they found that the water was a lot better than Pecos River water. A lot cleaner. Mm-hmm. A lot tastier. That was, in fact, the reason why the first well in Roswell was dug, because a local businessman up there by the name of Jaffa, it's a German name and starts with J, so I don't know if he anglicized his pronunciation or not. But he could not stand Pecos River water, so he dug a well and discovered the water was, healthy, tasteful.
Right.
And so that led to other people digging wells up and down the Pecos River. And while Hagerman scoffed at it, those wells were actually tapping into the groundwater that fed the rivers that eventually fed into the Pecos River, which meant that the Pecos River was getting lower and lower each year.
Right. And less people were needing his water, basically.
Precisely.
So...
And one of those, in hindsight, you're not sure if you should sigh or laugh or how you should feel about it, but while the federal government was assisting with repairs to Lake Avalon in 1905 after the 1904 flood, they were doing some core samples and found a lot of evidence of oil, which they buried at the very bottom of their report because they did not want prospectors to come and tear up what they had done just to get the oil.
Right.
And so had Hagerman accepted the notion of digging wells, he would have found oil.
And he might have been the one associated with the first wells and the beginnings of the oil and gas industry in this part of the country, instead of some other folks.
Precisely. And with his irrigation company and his railroad company struggling financially, that would have, of course, saved him, but it didn't.
No, especially the railroad company. He might have been of course, I'm thinking he would have been a customer at some point in time to the oil and gas folks. I mean, they would have been customers of his, but...
Eventually, but he had to sell to the Santa Fe Railroad, so that happened long before they were digging wells. So
sure.
He really lost out.
Yeah.
And where Artesia fits in with all this is interesting. As far as I can tell, Artesia, or the area that was Artesia, actually was a legitimate homestead. So you remember a couple weeks ago I was mentioning how Charles Eddy and James Hagerman and others, John Chisholm especially, were going around and having their employees fraudulently file homesteads in order to get land that they would then sell to their employers.
Mm-hmm.
But the land under Artesia was an actual homestead by John Truitt.
Okay.
Who came out west. He started farming on this land. He dug a few wells. Again, those wells that Hagerman didn't like. And he actually had at least one child while living out here and farming out here.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it was known as Miller because that was the name of the railroad depot built in the area.
Mm-hmm.
He eventually sold to another individual who then sold to the Artesia Town Site company that Sally Chisholm and others had formed.
So unlike the others who were land barons, if you will, trying to just figure out a way to get as much land as possible, Artesia was founded as, or started as, and continued to be homestead. Families come here, buy property, and move here.
Exactly. And as the town developed and grew, they took that original homestead and some other lands in the area. They bought that land and then they divided it up into smaller plots of land. But instead of trying to convince people to buy into the river irrigation systems, Artesia was built around the well drilling industry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as a support industry for agriculture. And so Artesia was, of course, named after the artesian wells, but it was from the very beginning just built around small families trying to build farms.
And then the drilling, meaning the water wells, which eventually, I'm sure, led to the discovery of oil and the shift there to drilling for oil instead of drilling for water.
It did, although the area here is still well known for agriculture. There's still a lot of course, you drive up and down the highway and you see farms everywhere. You see a lot of alfalfa and dairies.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And that's all due to the wells.
Yeah, well, very interesting. So, in conclusion, because I think you wanted to wrap up the this particular string. So, how would you like to conclude this sequence?
Well, in conclusion, you can learn from history. You can learn from how people did things, and what you can learn is that if you do things the right way without trying to hurt others, odds are pretty good that you'll succeed. like Artesia.
Right.
They did a proper homestead, and they succeeded. Whereas Charles Eddy and James Hagerman were trying to become the largest landowners in the area. They wanted to develop and build land for themselves, land for their companies. They used questionable means and even illegal means to acquire lands. And given that this was still Lincoln County, and there's a lot of back in the 1880s, and there's still the Lincoln County War going on, it's highly likely that Charles Eddy has his own body count. Very likely.
Yeah.
They tried to build up through questionable means and exhibited a lot of hubris, and it ended with them losing it all.
That's right.
Their systems fell apart. Their attempts at cutting costs wound up destroying everything they built, and it's an interesting lesson to learn from history.
Absolutely, and that's what history is good to study, so that we try not to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Let's see, we've got about a minute or so left. Michael, you've got your Fashionable Founding Fathers exhibit at the museum?
Yes, it is on display in the Arts Center. Menswear of 1905, the year that Artesia gained its town charter. And the museum is open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 1 and 2 to 4.
Tuesday through Saturday. So pop on in. I think you've said you've got pop in at the Ward building first, and then if you want to see the Fashionable Founding Fathers exhibit, right?
Yes, stop by the Ward House. He was a farmer and rancher in the area, and in fact, his bunkhouse for his employees is behind the house for when they need to stop into town. Stop by the Ward House, walk through the house, and then come over to the Art Center next door.
Excellent. For some reason, I've got coffee stuck, and I'm trying not to cough here. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time. Always enjoy it, and we'll look forward to seeing where you take us next week.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.